to this episode of In Lay Terms. I'm your host, Payman Ascari, and today I'm very pleased to have our guest on. It's Mr. Jeff Colvin. How are you doing, Mayor Colvin?
Good, thank you. Thank you for letting us come on today.
No, thank you for coming on, and you've made quite an impact on your province to the point where even here in BC, people are taking notice. But for the benefit of the audience that might actually have not heard of you, can you give us a brief introduction of who you are and how you came to be, quasi famous?
Yeah. No, thank you very much. My name is Jeff Colvin. I was the former mayor of Chestermere, the city of Chestermere, which is just on the edge of Calgary, on the east side. I was removed. Myself and three councillors were removed on December 4th, 2023, from office. On top of that, we had our three CAOs removed from office at the same time on December 4th, 2023, and that's obviously a very wild event that you really shouldn't happen in our democracy in Canada.
Right. Go ahead.
So just to give a little bit of background in regards to my situation, I've been living in Chestermere, which is a small town of about 30,000 people. We've been growing very quickly since basically the last 10, 15 years actually. I've lived here for about 25 years in Chestermere. When I first got here, there was approximately a population of about 2,500 people. So it's grown up to 30,000 now, so substantial. In that time period, I recognized that there was some odd things happening in our city. And just to give you a bit of background, so my background is in development and utilities. And so I'm familiar with developing subdivisions from scratch, from farmland all the way up to roads and streetlights, which comes with all of the stuff that's underneath the ground. So you're talking about deeps and shallow services and whatnot, which are not very exciting to talk about, but they're integral for a subdivision to work and for a city to work. And so most of the city, in relation to the infrastructure side of things, is about that. And so in working with building subdivisions and condominiums and office buildings, I've also been in the hotel industry as well as restaurants. And so during these projects and construction, you get involved in every aspect there is in relation to putting something in the ground and creating something. And that's a lot of the same processes that a city goes through when they're working on their growth, I guess. The administration and management of the city is a little bit different. The day-to-day management of it from an operations perspective is similar. When you're looking at roads and fleet, clearing sidewalks, clearing snow, picking up garbage, etc. Those are normal things. And for me, for treatment plants and sewer plants and pipelines, that was also part of my background. And that's a lot of what the city is involved in. The other really beneficial thing that we had when I was running for council, which I was elected in October 18th, 2021. Fortunately, there was three other individuals that were elected, and they had tremendous business experience as well, which was really opportune for a city the size of ours. One of our councillors, which I was hoping that was going to join us today, Stephen Hanley, he's an expert in the financial and accounting side of things, and he's a real guru. He was 45 years with CN Rail as a senior financial partner, very serious position, very smart fellow. And we also had a fellow, Blaine Funk, who was a counselor, and his background was procurement and logistics for 25 years. And then we had grassroots kind of fellow, Mel Fote, who had been in the farming business as well as the agriculture business for 45, 50 years. So we all came with it with substantial diverse backgrounds, as well as really a keen desire to make sure that our population and our residents' families came first in our community, and that is easy for a politician to say, but just to give you my take on that is this is the first time that I've been in politics, and so I've never not a politician per se. Obviously, I was elected, so I guess I've become one all of a sudden. But I don't have any other desire to move on in politics. The only reason that I particularly ran was just simply to help our small town. And I'm semi-retired, so I wanted to give back. And for me to give back, volunteering and doing certain things wasn't exactly the most exciting thing for me. I wanted to give back and help plan infrastructure and what I've been involved in. And that's where some of my passions lie in development. So in the last 8 years, there's been a lot of questionable activities in the city of Chestermere. We had a petition where we had just under 6,000 residents over the age of 18 sign to have the government, municipal affairs, investigate the council and to investigate our water utility for corruption back in 2016. So at that time, that was pretty much most of our population, our voting population at the time. And what was odd about that situation, never mind the fact that you're getting a petition, was that municipal affairs didn't do anything. And you kind of think about that and you're like, well, an entire city gets together and says, there's a real big problem here. Government, come do your job and come look at this place. What ended up happening is not one single councillor that was a part of that administration at the time, council at the time, ran for office again. And in fact, most of them moved out of the city. Kind of odd. So that was really what had been happening, is we noticed a lot of projects were being done, and from the most information you can see from the outside is very limited. And so we noticed that there was a lot of projects that the city was getting involved in that didn't make any sense, and the numbers that we were being told from what we could hear were crazy, were completely overpriced. And in my industry in construction, I have to admit, I learned the hard way too. When I had been taken advantage of by some of my staff. I had some staff back, I don't know, 15 years ago now, that had a kickback scheme going on with one of our trades. And they would recommend, all these things to me. And I was like, are you sure? That makes sense. Are you really sure? And of course they said, yes, we're sure. And because of their background and their experience, and these are 30-year veterans, I said, okay, well, it's good to have a team around you that has the expertise. And I found out about 2 years later, they had been doing a kickback scheme against our company. And it's what's so wild about a kickback scheme is that it's hard to figure out, because you're not paying money from your company to somebody and they're stealing, money by a check, or they're stealing money by cash. That's not how it's happening. How it happens is that they are quoting on a project, and then you're accepting an overpriced project. And so if a project comes in that should be $100,000 and it comes in at $500,000, now you'd think that your other professionals that are around you would raise some flags and whatnot. And depending on the complexity of the decision, that might happen. And so that was our big concern about Chestermere's construction projects, is they seemed wildly off the mark. And when I talk about that, I'm talking about, like, we had a lift station project, which we called Lift Station 13, aptly named, that started at $8 million and ended up finishing at $24 million. And so you're like, well, there's some cost overruns, three times the quoted price. So what's wild about that is that the lift station, what it does is it moves sewage. And we don't treat our sewage in the city of Chestermere. We push it back to Calgary, which is very fortunate for us. What's surprising about the situation is our sewage plant, which manages the entire sewage from our entire city and just simply pumps it to the city of Calgary. That plant operates at a 4% capacity right now. And utilities don't work well at 4%. These things are big, they're robust, and you can imagine you're pumping this sewage, and it's a very specific task. Anyways, this plant is operating at 4% capacity. So, most utilities should be 60, 70, 80, 90% capacity, and then you add another train to it, or you add another phase to it when you want to expand. You never want something operating at 4%. So kind of some of the things that are so blatant about that, we spend $1 million a year pumping clean oxygen into the pipeline so they don't explode. Because one of the problems is with H2S gas is you can't let it sit and continue to concentrate. And because of the fact that we don't move our sewage very well, and the reason we don't move our sewage well is that our smallest pump is 450 liters a second. So that's a pretty big pump. Our city produces 50 liters a second. So we can't even turn our pump on and leave it on. That's how silly this is, right? So, and this isn't just a mistake, okay? An engineer is not allowed to build a product like this, is not allowed to design a product this bad. And so there's a lot of questionable tactics that are going on. And this happened in a road project that we built, 2.5 miles of road. And for those of you that understand that, that's about $1.5 million to $2 million a mile to build a road. Ours came in just under $18 million. We had a variety of projects that just make no sense that came in at very, very 4 or 5 times the price. And this is what got us to running. And so this is why it was very shocking when we were on the outside looking in, what we saw and what I wanted to do. And that really motivated me to run. I noticed that when I was watching the council meetings before I became elected, I noticed the CAO, who is your head person in the city that runs the city technically underneath council. He was intimidating and bullying councillors, and he was being very evasive in their answer. And that's, when you're running a company, anybody can tell, but specifically when you're running a company and you're trying to get answers from people, your staff or people you're negotiating with, when they go around and around and around and around and they don't answer your question, you kind of know there's something up. And this CAO was doing that to the councillors, and while he's going around and around, he would get mad at them, and then the people would feel kind of foolish, and then he would then finish, and then that was his tactic that he would use, and the councillors were like, oh, okay, it must be done then. I'm done my question. And because they felt a little bit intimidated at the same time, so we removed him right when we got into office, and we then Personally, I felt that a single CAO model is apt for corruption. And I personally believe that a single person can't know everything. And a single CAO, a city is a big beast. Regardless of the size, you're managing a lot of different expertise areas. And in a normal company, you have a president, for example, or a CEO, and that person is responsible for that company. However, their product lines are very laser focused. They run four product lines, and that's their focus of their company, and they've got to do that well. A city has a vast amount of interests, and so we split that up right in the beginning of our term, which was very novel. We've made 3 CAOs instead of 1 CAO, and we felt that the expertise is now there, and we went after private sector people, where there's a ton of people available to choose from. In the government sector for CAOs, if you put out an ad, you might get 3, 4 people that might apply. And these people are paid anywhere from, $375,000 $300,000 a year to $500,000 a year. And so to me, it's very shocking that these people, really are in that level that they don't understand what they're doing. And it's frustrating from the perspective of the city that you're paying these people that kind of money and getting, this level of performance. And quite frankly, I think that the CAOs are stressed out because they're having to deal with council so much. And a council is not an easy beast to deal with. You've got 7 different personalities. For the most part, they're new. Sometimes you've got some incumbents or some old councillors, but you've got a lot of new councillors, which they have their belief on how things should be done. And that causes a real good opportunity for stress on the CAO. And I've had a number of CAOs reach out to me that have indicated that they prefer our three CAO model, or tri-CAO model. Because what's happening in the industry is the CAOs are getting fired every term or every second term, which, how's that for your career? Moving your family around every 3 to 6 years. Mostly you'd like to put down some roots. So anyways, we've had a lot of interest in that tri-CAO model. And just to be clear, under Section 205 of the MGA, it specifically says that one or more persons can make up the office of the CAO. And so that's very clear that that's not our rule, that's the government's rule, that one or more. So that means obviously more than one, or one, I guess. So we chose a tri-CAO model, and the biggest reason for that was expertise, but also transparency. And our goal was to eliminate or reduce corruption. And so the first step to doing that is making everything transparent. Now, we paid these people between $120,000 to $160,000 a year. So much, much, much different. And the breadth of people that, our internal position, which was corporate services, is more of an accounting, marketing, communications type position. Our external position, our external CAO was community operations, which is more of roads and fleet. So, moving snow, cutting grass, etc., repairing roads. And then our professional position was engineering, which was growth and infrastructure, which was an engineering planner type person. So very different skill sets for all these people. And quite frankly, we're really impressed with the people that we had. And that led us to a lot of transparency. It's more work for the council because you have to answer their questions, right? They want something done, or they have a problem, and you have to then listen to 3 people tell you their problems. And I think that's important because each area of the city is critically important to city operations and also to different people in the public. And so I think that model is critical to the success of cities. And I don't know if you've heard, but there's been some wild things going on in Alberta recently about CAOs quitting in Edmonton. The CAO quit a week ago, and it just speaks to this lack of transparency and challenging situation that they're in as a single person. So when we first got in, what was shocking is that there were so many irregularities, and we were blocked by our staff, senior staff, to finding out information. And so that seems kind of crazy, right? When I walked into my office was completely clean. And when I mean by that, I mean showroom clean. There wasn't a paper, a pen, a stapler, or paperclip. It had all been deleted. It had all been removed. And we had been very suspect of past irregularities of the previous administration, actually 2 administrations. So it seemed kind of par for the course. They had deleted all of their emails. They had deleted all of the electronic files. All of the paper files were gone. So that's pretty stark, right? Pretty suspect. That where's the continuity of service? I would have imagined that the mayor would have had projects that were being worked on that he was a part of. Well, not one piece of paper was provided to myself on past whatever the heck he had been doing for the last 4 years. And so that kind of tells the story about, what starts in your mind to happen. Within the first month, we had found a number of projects and irregularities because we stopped all construction projects within the city that the city was doing. And you can't do that forever, but part of that was to change the policies around the way they're done. And then secondly, to really stop corruption. Because the way that corruption happens is that anywhere there's a pool of money, people are devising a way to get access to it. And you want to stop the fact that a city, which has the ability to choose a person to do a project, choose a construction company, for example, to do a project, and they're also the payer. So you never want to have that type of situation. If it's your own money, that's fine, because you want to protect your own money. But when you're managing somebody else's money, you can't be the same person that chooses who's going to do it, and you're the payer of them. There's no check and balance there. So by stopping it, we identified, and our staff were concerned about that. So how's everything going to get done? And it's like, well, okay, explain to us how things are getting done. How are you doing everything you're doing? And we had already had an idea before we'd asked the question what the answer was. But what we quickly found is that the city had been banking developers' deals. And what I mean by that is that infrastructure that developers were supposed to pay for, the city had been banking it. And what I mean by that is that they were further starting the project and then trying to collect like 2 years later. And the reason you do that is so that the developer doesn't understand exactly what went into that project. They can look, they could actually take the city to court to prove the pricing, but they never do because they're risking their delays on their approvals and permits and all this kind of stuff. So they just do it as, so it's a perfect opportunity for corruption and kickbacks, is that the city just passes it on, and the developers don't ask questions. And so what we said is that, number one, we're stopping the construction. Developers are going to pay for everything that they need, touch, or affect. And the developers are going to bank everything on themselves, not on the city's back. And so what that meant is the city had a lot more cash because we weren't banking them anymore, and the developers weren't happy. But I was like, listen, when I was developing, nobody ever wrote me a check from a municipality. That never happened. So why is it happening here? And so that is what we stopped. And very quickly we had very quick success with pricing coming way down on projects. We had a dog park, as simple as this sounds. We had a dog park that was quoted by us, our city procurement department, and it was quoted at $475,000. Now, this is just fencing. This is just black chain link fence, 40 inches tall. And they came in and told us this, and I said, how many linear feet are you guys running? And so I did the calculation, and it was $60 or $70 a linear foot. And I'm like, listen, I probably put in about 3 kilometers of black chain link fence. And it's been $19 to $21 a linear foot for the last, 20 years. It doesn't seem to change with pricing of steel. It just keeps on the same. And so we asked them about how they do their quote and to figure out their quoting process and where was there any issues, if there was. And we realized there was. And long story short, we got it requoted under a very transparent process where we actually went out and did our job and tried to bring people to go quote. And we got it down to $75,000. So we saved $400,000. And so one of the things that I was trying to change with the culture of the city is there's a lot of apathy, which I was surprised at, from the employees to the residents and taxpayers. And I said, they're your boss. The taxpayer is technically the employer. And we have to treat them like they're investors or shareholders, and they deserve a proper return, and they deserve proper efficiencies within the city. We're hired by them, and that was something that the staff really didn't understand. It didn't respect, and it took time, but it did change. Our culture did change, and we were.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Say that again.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I'm trying to, so you're from the inside and you keep talking about kickbacks and you kind of, most of us don't understand how this works. So let's take this $400,000 chain link fence. You knocked it down to 75. That's yep. 325,000. Is it like the CAO goes to construction company X and he says, hey, I'll give you this $75,000 project for $400K, come over later on with a bucket full of cash? Like, how does that work for the ordinary person?
That's why it's hard to prove and hard to track. Is that so? In our procurement situation, we had a procurement officer who we were trying to figure out how they did things, because in my business, I knew how we did it. So when they were going to get a quotes, which is all that really is, you want it from third-party quotes, so you're trying to reduce corruption. What they were doing is they were putting their package together, which identified the scope and the requirements. And then it's almost, I'll make it simplified, but it's like they throw it in the computer and then they walk away. And I said, you put it on a site and you walk away. Don't you call companies and find out who the heck is in the chain link business and go call a bunch of installers and tell them to put in their quotes, get them going, all this kind of stuff? Nope. So how do you know you're getting a good cross-section of people who want to quote? versus, who you asked, told, who knows, who got the information. So you in that situation, you don't know if it's corruption or if it's negligence or they're just bad at their job. So that's where it's either apathy, that they don't give a crap about taxpayers' money, or they are potentially a part of something that leads in a bad direction. What if, let's just pretend for a second it was corruption. So how that would work is that the construction company would give them a quote for $475,000. Here's the project. The city gal would say, hey, this is the right price. They would come to council and they would recommend that to council. And council goes, okay, so you guys have done your job. Okay, you're sure this is the best price we can get and we're good to go. And they say, yes, yes, yes. So then we as council, without knowing anything about that area, would go, okay. And we would sign off on it. So when we sign off on it, and we make that, we approve that payment, then the city would then pay it. And so the city pays that payment, and then what happens is the construction company takes that $475,000, and then because they're paid that from the city, and then they can pay that to whoever they want on the other side. So we would never see how that would happen, right? And traditionally, what would happen in a kickback scenario is they would give a fee, some kind of a payment to the person from the city that said. That recommended the project to council to try and push it and push that narrative. And so that's where it gets, a little hard for the city to go, and we can't go after the construction company because we agreed to their price. And then secondly, if we did, for what? They gave us a price, we agreed to it. Getting behind and seeing their books as to who they paid. I mean, technically, that payment that they make is actually tax deductible to CRA. It's an expense. It could be a consulting expense to somebody. Now, if it's one of our staff, that's illegal. But again, making that comparison is the challenge. And so what happens and what you're concerned about is it's all about transparency, because how we discovered it was because of my experience. So the only reason that we discovered is that I had done chain link fences before, and I said, that's nuts, that price. So in a city, what we wanted to change, and what we did change, is the procurement process. And so what we did is we brought our developers in because they're the payer. And as I said before, the city was actually pushing them away. Don't look at what we're doing, and we'll come talk to you in 2 years. That's the wrong way to do things from every angle. The city's banking the development, the infrastructure, and the developer's not a part of it. It works if you're getting a kickback. So what they would do is that, what we did was that we brought the developers in the design process. So we brought their engineers and their designers into it, so that we were benefiting from their bench strength. Like, a lot of these developers are very, very large, and their companies have a lot of bench strength, a lot of backup. And so we want to use that expertise. And what's really key about that from a city's perspective is, guess what? We're not paying for it. So that's a good deal. You're getting the top-notch guys in the industry, and the developer is paying for it. And the reason that he wants to do that is that, one, when you have eyes on the RFP process, the design process, then they are the experts. They know what the right prices is before we even start the program. And the nice thing is that they also ask all of their associates, colleagues, to come and quote, because they've done work with them for the last 20 or 30 years. And that's a good thing, because you're competing in the quote, right? It doesn't mean they get to mark it up. And why would they want to mark up their own payment? Right? It doesn't make sense. So we were using the developers to help with the language in the contracts, so the scope, and hopefully the idea is that reduces your change orders. And why that's good is because that's another 30% that construction companies try and take advantage of you. If you're not familiar with the correct contract language, they are built in to try and make changes happen so that the price goes up of everything. And that's how you get your cost overruns and all the rest of it. So we brought in this process, and in our first project, which was a $17 million storm, underground storm design and instruction and construction, we saved $5 million off of the previous design and quote. And everybody says, "Oh my God, I thought prices went up. Geez, COVID, this, that, and the other thing." And you're like, and it's not that there isn't price increases, but you have to be smart about the way you're doing everything. And unfortunately, the way the city would approach it before, people just don't know enough about what they're doing, and the councilors didn't know enough to ask. And when they're chastised every time they did ask, they didn't feel like asking anymore. And even for the previous mayor to let that happen, if staff were talking like that to our council, it wouldn't last long. Staff have to respect council, and council has to respect them too. There's no question. It is a two-way street, but you're there for a reason. You're there for business. And so we have a job to do. All of our community hired us to do the best job we can and provide a good return for our shareholders, which is our taxpayers. What does a good return look like? It's not necessarily that we're paying them cash or a dividend, but we're making sure that we stretch their dollars and get as much use out of them as possible. And we're trying not to increase taxes because we have to look at efficiencies. When we first got in, I asked about, okay, where's all the KPIs what are all the target goals that you guys are doing? And they're like, shocked. Like, what's a KPI? And I'm like, key performance indicator? Like, have you guys not done this before? Wow, you guys have in our city's not big. You have a $50 million budget and you guys are just flying by the seat of your pants? We were told when we got in that our city was broke, and I believe that because they were headed to bankruptcy. And they also told us that we needed to raise taxes 25%. So in our city, that was $5 million, okay, of our residential portion. And so as much as that sounds crazy to a lot of your listeners, Chestermere actually had a previous incident between 2010 and 2014 where our taxes were raised 300%. So that seems crazy. We did have some of that being the increases that happened with the education tax, but 300% is just wild. And why is that so crazy? My taxes went from $3,500 a year to just about $12,000 a year. And what was really upsetting about that is that we had residents and friends that lived, neighbors that were seniors that had fixed incomes. And it's like, what do you mean you're tripling the taxes? I didn't get my payments tripled from the government to handle this, what you consider a consumer price or a cost increase. That's just nuts. And that was what was being translated. And fortunately, Canadians are too agreeable, at least, or Albertans. We fight for sure when we believe in something, but boy, oh boy, to push back against government it just doesn't happen. And, we didn't have much pushback. We didn't have people, picketing. We didn't have, social media back then wasn't as big as it is today, but, it was really shocking. And I felt really bad for these people. And I think for people, there's a time in your life when you've paid enough tax. And how many times does that road out front of you need to be paid for? Like, seriously, it hasn't been repaved every 5 years or something. So these were some of the reasons why, we were really, really focused on trying to find efficiencies in the city. And just to give you some quick examples so I can get through for your listeners, we found out that we had 60 Visa cards. Now, in a city with an employees of about 120 staff, that's excessive. And so we asked our accounting department or accounting manager, okay, so you reconcile those Visa every month, right? And they said, yep. And I said, great. Can you give council the last 6 months reconciliations for all 60 Visa cards, like in the next hour? And they were like, shocked, right? And I'm like, what? You said you did it. It should be in a drawer. It should be on a Excel file. Like, print it and bring it in. Anyways, they admitted they don't. And it's like, so you don't reconcile people's ability to spend frivolously taxpayers' money. So we cut up 54 of those credit cards. And we had 6 credit cards left, which we then gradually started to expand again. But the point is only for the senior managers. Everybody doesn't need a credit card. We also found out that we had 300 cell phones active, paying for every month. And we only have 120 staff. Now, out of those 120 staff,
wait, let me go back. You're telling me they don't even keep the statements for the credit cards?
They would keep the statements, but they wouldn't reconcile them. So reconciling, what I mean by that is that they would review the statement, they would go line by line and make sure the items made sense. That they had the invoices for them, they had the receipts for them, that they were related to council or city business. And you're like, show me the list of reconciliation that you've done to show that these people aren't ripping off the city. And they couldn't. And I'm like, okay, all right. And that's where we decided to tear up 54 of the visas and get back to something under control and then figure out who's who, because that level of irresponsibility is shocking, right? Like, why would you have 60 visa cards in the first place for 120 staff? Like, are you kidding? But this is the problem, is the difference between private industry and government is not positive. It's very bad. They don't care about the money they spent. I had asked for a TV for our boardroom so we could do presentations off of it, because today's TVs, they're big, they're inexpensive, and they're perfect for presentations, right? So a 60 or 70-inch TV. Well, they came back with an 80-inch TV quote. They were going to buy it, and I said, actually, you guys are making me so nervous. Everything I find around here is so ridiculous. I don't want you to buy it. I don't trust you. I want you to come back with a quote. So they came back with a quote, $100,000. And I was kind of shocked. I'm like, you're saying that with a straight face? Like, this isn't a joke? I told you to be careful on the spending and the money and the cost. And so anyways, myself and a CAO went to Best Buy and picked up a $1,300 80-inch TV that we put on the wall in the council boardroom, and it worked perfect for the whole 2 years and still works today. And it's just that, like I said to the staff, I said, it's not a movie theater, you guys, okay? Like, we're not projecting massive sound, or we're not, it's just nonsense the way you guys spend money. And taxpayers deserve better, right? And this philosophy and this attitude towards taxpayers has got to change. And it's just so wrong. Never mind the big corruption, just the minor corruption. We were able to save, like when I said that they wanted to do a 25% increase in our residents' taxes when we first got in, and that was provided by the previous council and the current administration. That budget, we looked at that budget and we said, I don't think so. We got to take a look at this. And so with us trying to get that information, the place blew up. You're like, doesn't council typically get financial information? Like, what do you mean? What's the problem? We had so much resistance from staff trying to block us from getting access to financial information. And this is where it becomes shocking, is that they were actively blocking us. So we have a thing called, our software for our accounting is called Questica. And so we wanted to get read-only access to Questica, not that we could manipulate the documents and change them, and obviously we aren't the operator of that area. They wouldn't give it to us. They ended up seeking a legal opinion from their lawyer to block us. Now, fortunately, the lawyer, even though he's a scoundrel, came back and said, no, you can't block council. Now, did they tell us? No, they didn't tell us for 2 months that we were allowed to actually see it. And we found out because they never told us, actually. We found out because we were on a call with the Questica training department. And we said, yeah, as soon as we get access, we'd like to know how access. And they said, what do you mean as soon as you get access? You've got access right now. We've got it on our screen. Really? We have access, do we? So that's all of council. All councilors have read-only access. And so, nonetheless, in this budget, we ended up being able to go through it. We had hired a consultant because this was our first time in council, so we didn't want to make rash decisions that we didn't consider all the options that we would make a mistake. And we hired a consultant to help us with this. And we said, the way that I'm reading this and the way that the city is designed, I see massive inefficiencies. And our one councillor, Stephen Hanley, he agreed with that. His analysis was like, this is completely hogwash. And we believed we could save $15 million off of our budget. And, that's unheard of. That would be the equivalent of about 60% on the residential side and operational side. And he said, don't be that aggressive. And I said, well, do you disagree with any of our assumptions here? He goes, nope. And he said, but I would be conservative. And I said, okay, I respect the fact that we should be conservative in our first year. Okay, that makes sense. But what I want to do is I still want to aim for this target. And I want to put the savings in a separate account. And if the city needs it, if we've made a mistake and the city needs it, then they can come to council and they can ask for money that they should have had. Okay, but if we're right, they never needed to touch it. And he said, okay, that's fine. So we ended up cutting the $5 million off the budget that the city wanted to do. We further ended up cutting another $4 million off the budget. And then we also put to the side, we put $8 million to the side because we did a $5 million worth of council initiatives. So it worked out to about $13 million to the side. And we ended up hitting those targets. And so it's incredible that, and in our second year, we were able to do a 25% reduction in our residential taxes and still target to save another 25%. So what's shocking about that is that we didn't cancel services. We didn't cancel anything. We actually doubled our funding of nonprofits. But we're always critical of the way money's spent, though. Like that's the difference is in your private world, you have to be critical of how your money's spent because otherwise you obviously won't stay alive and your company won't succeed and you won't have profit in the end. And it's not massive culture change. It's minor changes for people to start respecting how things are spent because it's not their money. But we were able to find significant changes. And in Alberta, we had the federal government had downloaded RCMP back payments to us, which was about $1 million. And in our city, that's a big number. We were able to absorb that, no problem. We hired another 4 RCMP officers and equipment, which was another $1 million. We hired another 6 firefighters and equipment, which was another $1 million. So we had, and a lot of these things hadn't been done since 2014. So we quickly brought the city back up to 2023 at 2022 at the time, in a matter of the first budget. So that was shocking that when we were told we were broke, needed to raise $5 million and couldn't afford anything. We went from, yeah, right, and reduced taxes and reduced our spending and spent another $5 million on initiatives that weren't even contemplated by the previous council. So, and what's shocking is that every city can do this. This isn't rocket science, but you have to be willing to ask questions and you have to question the narrative. You've got to make sure they're not telling you, lies. Anytime we had people say, well, that's in the MGA, the Municipal Government Act, we said, okay, where? Let's look it up. Because one, we wanted to become smarter about the MGA. We wanted to be more skilled about it. And it's an unfamiliar document in the sense that why would you ever want to read it if you're in the private sector? And it's not a crazy document. It's about 700 pages, but it's a book about 6 inches by about 8 inches. So it's not a huge book. And most of it complies to, from a city's perspective and a resident's perspective is maybe 50 pages. So, it's a very doable thing. And I recommend that people start to become familiar with the document in certain areas of it. What we found out, though, so as we started to find these irregularities, we had a utility company that had been what's the right terminology, had been moved out of the city's structure to an independent, wholly owned private entity. And you're like, okay, that's kind of cool. Why would you do that? Is there some efficiencies that you're going to gain somehow by not being in the city? And some cities have done that. Some cities have not done that. So, why are you looking to do this? And that really wasn't ever explained. What ended up happening, though, is they moved it out improperly, whether that was by design or whether that was by accident. You're paying people a lot of money to do things properly, so you wonder how they could possibly do it wrong. What they did is they moved out the assets. So you're moving out the asset value of what you're doing. You're moving out the assets, but what they didn't do is they didn't move out the equity. So on the financial books, you're moving out half of the transaction. And that really screws everything up. So in layman's terms, now most people don't even pay attention to this when you're looking at financial statements of a company. You have things called depreciation and amortization. And those are non-cash events, so most people don't care about it. All you care about is how much money do I have in my bank account. That's all I care about at the end of the year. Did I make money or did I lose money? That's what I want to know, because CRA is going to come knocking. And that's what you focus on. So those non-cash events of amortization and depreciation, you're like, I don't even want to talk about that, accountant. Leave me alone. I want to talk about how much money's in the bank account and how much tax do I owe, because that's always a problem. So when you only have one side of that transaction, typically in the revenue area and in the expense area, they offset each other, which is why most people don't care about it. They typically always offset each other, not almost exactly. And so because the city had rolled out this asset improperly, it only had the expense factor, the depreciation. And didn't have what we call deferred revenue or equity in the revenue side. And so that really screws things up. And what it does is it gives you a false narrative. It overstates your expenses. And that's never a good idea. So in a utility, it obviously has to break even or make some money. It can't lose, because that's the city's utility. It can't lose. It has to stay functional. It doesn't have to make profit, but it has to stay in good, healthy condition because it's an essential service, and so it's very critical. What would happen is, let's say that let's say the utility made $1 million. Okay, all of our citizens paid their payments for water every month, and it made $1 million of profit. Okay, it should never budget for that, but it could happen for a few reasons. Nothing nefarious. And then all of a sudden, we're only affecting our revenues by your expenses, so revenues less expenses, and our revenues are overstated because they've got depreciation in there, and there's no offsetting factor in the revenue side. So all of a sudden, your $1 million gain actually turns into, let's just say you had $2 million of depreciation. Very easy to have that. It's nothing. Boom, we lost $1 million. And you're like, oh my gosh. And what does the city do? They go, oh, we lost $1 million. Okay, we've got to go raise rates. And they went and raised rates. And they did this for 12 years. They did this. And that's one of the things the citizens were losing their mind over back in 2016, was that investigation of that corruption. Because an accountant should figure that out real quick. You should be able to go, and the cool thing is that every person can take a look at the financial statements for this company, and you will see there's only one side of that transaction, and you will go, huh, and go take a look at anybody else's financial statements anywhere, and you will see two sides to that transaction: depreciation and deferred revenue. And that's what's shocking. And you kind of ask yourself, well, why? Why would that happen? And so what happens is that if you continue to do all these construction projects, okay, and they're always getting kickbacks, so you're always wanting this more and more construction, so that you can do your big kickbacks and you can take this money, okay? What happens is how am I going to pay for that? If I keep going to the residents, they're going to get upset. I'm going to do, I want to do a $10 million project. I'm getting greedy. I'm going to go to the residents. I'm going to raise taxes by $10 million. They're going to lose it. What you do is you take out debt. So do the residents know that the city took out debt? Nope. Could they find out? Sure. But do they pay attention? Nope. So I go and I take out $10 million of debt to do this project, which I've got kickbacks in it. Now, how do I service that debt? Well, that's small money. So I only need to bring in, a couple $100,000, and there we go. I've serviced that debt. Well, that's where I've got to raise taxes a little bit, or I've got to raise my utility expenses a little bit. And I'm covering off that expense of the servicing of the debt. And so that's what our city did. And you're like, well, how do you know that's corrupt? So I had developers come to me with an allegation of a kickback scheme that the city had been involved in on a construction of a bridge. And they brought me a foot worth of paperwork. And just to say it really quickly, they had 4 quotes for $3.7 million to $4 million. And then all of a sudden the city changed its mind and went to a different engineer in a different city, and the price went to $10 million. They came back and they asked the construction company, how much are you getting paid for this bridge? 3.7. They're like, wow. And why a developer is concerned about that is that they would get charged for that infrastructure typically. And it's called offsite levies. And they would get charged like 2 years down the road. And they were concerned that $10 million, they said, whoa, that'll put us out of business. It's too much for our projects. We can only afford the $4 million bridge. And the city came back to them and said, don't worry about it. And they said, we're worried about it. What are you talking about? Of course, we're worried about it. The city said, don't worry about it. We'll take out the debt. And they said, well, obviously you're going to take out the debt, but we can't afford to pay for it. And they said, no, we're taking out the debt. The city will cover that. You will only ever have to pay the maximum of the $4 million, and we'll give you a piece of paper to say so. And so they're like, okay, why would you want to do that? Like, that's just nonsense. So they came to us with a $6 million kickback scheme, as they believe is what happened, and they have all the records to prove that. And just to give you, so I've told you a bunch of things around how we found savings and all this kind of stuff, which everybody can do. It's the question of will to do it. And as I mentioned, when I first got in office, we found everything had been deleted. Okay. I had brought all of these concerns to Municipal Affairs and Minister of Municipal Affairs, Rick McIver. And I brought that to him in the first month, of office. What was surprising to me is that he wasn't interested in them at all. Either was Municipal Affairs. They didn't care. And I'm like, what do you guys do? Like, if you're not interested in helping a city out, because I don't want to investigate these, I don't want to adjudicate these, I don't have the authority either. You need to. So who do I send it to? And so we had tried to get them on side, and unfortunately they weren't interested at all. But what did happen in the first 2 months, they started investigating us. And it was like, what? What would you want to look at? We just got in the door. And for running a city, you don't start from scratch, okay? You do have a lawyer that gives you advice and opinions. You do have a legislative clerk, which helps you with running meetings, as well as how to word motions and how to do things properly following the MGA, et cetera. So you do follow those things all the time. And we would ask for clarification from these people every single council meeting. Is, how do you word this? Is this the right way to say this? And so it was very odd that Mr. McIver was trying to do that. Initially, I thought that he was using that as a cover to investigate these corruption claims that we had found. And later, I found out that that wasn't the case, that he was simply trying to start an inspection on us. So we were the very first city in the history of Alberta to have an inspection started at us in the first 2 months. Not a good stat.
Can I actually have a series of notes. If you, I looked up on this guy, McIver, because he's sort of the antagonist of your story. So,
Yep.
So he's, for those that aren't in Alberta, the Ministry of Municipal Affairs, its mandate is to assist municipalities in providing well-managed, collaborative, and accountable local governments. The minister in charge is Rick McIver. He's been there since 2012. And he was actually a councilman of Calgary for 3 terms, and he ran for mayor and he failed. And you mentioned that his brother-in-law is the guy you unseated, the former mayor?
Yes, so that's where it got interesting, is that even though we had sent all this corruption to him, part of the allegations of the corruption were against the previous mayor and council. And so what we found out afterwards, that he was the ex-brother-in-law of Rick McIver. And it's like, oh, great. We just told him all the stuff that we were saying was potentially against this council and this guy. And, here he comes, and now he's coming after us. Wow, great idea this was. And that's what's frustrating, is that obviously was not disclosed to us at the time. And, and it's there's so many stories that it's hard to tell in any resemblance of an efficient time period. But in our first month, when we started digging into things, sending stuff to council sending stuff to municipal affairs and the various authorities, I had an interim CAO that was, because we fired our first CAO, and we had an interim CAO between the period when we hired our tri-CAO model, okay, our 3 CAOs. This interim guy came to us about a month after we were elected and indicated that, because we had been looking into things, indicated that he has some staff that he'd like to provide a mea culpa to. And I said, what the hell is a mea culpa? And I said, are you saying that if they come forward with criminal activity, you want me to give them a pass? He says, yes. And I said, I don't have the authority to do that. I'm not a judge. And no is the answer. I reminded him, I said, our platform, and in that meeting, I had 2 other counselors with me. Our platform was to root out corruption and to increase transparency. So the last thing we want is people to not tell us about what was going on. But I said, I think that the RCMP would look kindly on them if they would come forward. I mean, that would be typically a good idea. So he wasn't too happy with that. And then, without skipping a beat, the next thing out of his mouth was that he wants to pay out some hush money. And I said, what the hell? What do you mean by hush money? I think I know what you mean by hush money, but what? You want to pay people not to speak about something that's bad? No. Again, I just told you our platform was to expose corruption and transparency. We can't pay people out to not talk. They need to come in here and stand on the roof of the building and yell out whatever the heck their problem is. And he was quite visibly taken back by our attitude towards this, and all of the other 2 counselors agreed. And it was like, is this what happens when you get into office, that you get to see behind the curtain what's really going on? And I think that he was trying to make me complicit with what was going on. That if we would agree to this, they would have something on us, and that's how politicians get going, I guess, is that they got something on you, so you got to vote this way. And we're like, not going to happen. Our interests are very, very laser focused. We're interested in helping Chestermere only. That's it. And, and stopping corruption in Chestermere. And so, so what we found out, unfortunately, this guy was removed, I want to say 20 days later. And we found out about, probably 15 days after that, or maybe less, that he had paid out almost $600,000 to 2 people. And you're like, wow. And in the government world, that's completely illegal. Is that we operate on a budget, and a budget has to be approved by council, and it becomes law. We have to set up a bylaw for that. So a CAO, underneath the rules, can spend up to $75,000 unbudgeted, okay, without coming to council. Anything over $75,000 that's not on the budget, they have to come to council for approval. So he paid one person just under $400,000, and he paid the other person just over $200,000. Both of those, he has to come to council for approval, or it's totally theft, totally illegal, everything. we started a lawsuit. We went to the police, which got me nowhere, which I'll explain why later. We started a lawsuit against this guy and the people that took the money, as well as the IT manager that destroyed city property with the destruction of emails and hard drives and all this kind of crap. Within days of us getting removed in office of December 4th, Rick McIver and Municipal Affairs terminated that lawsuit, not wanting those people to get pressured to start talking about what they were trying to keep quiet.
Can I ask you about that?
Yep.
I was watching a couple of your interviews. Tell me if I'm correct. There is something called the Alberta recall petition.
Yep.
So the Alberta recall petition says that if you get 40% of the eligible voters on board to recall the mayor and councillor, you can recall them. Rick McIver, he uses that, but he never puts it up to a vote. And then after he removes you, he puts an administrator, which is just an employee, in instead of the entire council. And then using that employee, he squashes your lawsuit and your investigation. Is that correct?
Yeah. So that is correct in a nutshell. We had brought forward an investigation. We initially, when we took a look at our code of conduct, okay, which is our method in which we're allowed to basically our rules, how we have to operate. It identified the mayor as an adjudicator. And I said, that's wrong. I said, the mayor shouldn't be adjudicating anything. I said, that should go to an independent third party. And so we changed that rule in the very first, I think, month and a half, that we made an independent third party, which was a third party law firm out of Edmonton, Reynolds Mirth. And so we had brought forward an investigation into conduct breaches of our three councillors that still are in office today, lies and fraud they had told Municipal Affairs, various conduct that they had breached throughout the city, going around CAOs, going around mayors, intimidating staff, etc. We had brought that forward in an investigation, as well as we had identified collusion between the RCMP and these three councillors. We'd also identified collusion between the Municipal Affairs and RCMP and these three councillors. So we brought this investigation forward. We brought it public into September 27th, 2022. And within 20 hours of us bringing that public, Rick McIver installs a official administrator. And the first thing he does is terminate that investigation because it identified and exposed corruption between Municipal Affairs, the RCMP, and these three councillors, which is wildly offside. Like it's actually criminal. And so we were trying to push this information to get it inspected or investigated and adjudicated, and then from there take it to criminal court. So they stopped that immediately, and they wouldn't allow the investigations to continue. And the problem is we can't force the investigation unless we go to court. And so we were in the process of going to court to get a judge to force the Crown prosecutor to investigate these things. Because Municipal Affairs, Rick McIver, had a massive conflict of interest. One, Municipal Affairs was caught doing illegal things. Two, there was collusion between himself and alleged collusion between himself and his brother-in-law and Municipal Affairs and these three councillors and the RCMP. So all of these things needed proper investigation.
So I have a question about this Rick McIver. I looked into his background. He's been MLA since 2012. That's 12 years. I'm guessing he's a holdover from the Kenney administration.
Yeah.
So what do you think is Danielle Smith's view? Surely she knows, like, this guy's got egg on his face and he's guilty of sin.
She does. What my understanding is, and I wish, Danielle would step up, is that she has, she's got politics, right? And as a leader, I don't buy that. You're here to do a job. That's it. And, politics are different because you're trying to make sure you get elected again. And I don't buy into that. I think performance is how would get you elected again. and targets and hitting goals and doing things for your population is how you'd get elected again. So right now I understand there's 6 or 7 of these MLAs which are threatening to cross the floor from the UCP party to the NDP, and Rick McIver is one of them. And so if she were to go after these people, they would cross the floor and the UCP would lose power. And because the vote is 48 to 38, is the number of seats they've won. So they're 10 different. So it would take 5 people, 6 people, and then they would lose power. But to me, I think that's a very stark reality. If somebody wishes to cross the floor to an NDP from a UCP, that's a massive change. That's not minor. And quite frankly, I would think that those people would commit suicide politically by doing that. It's not the same as when Danielle Smith went from the Wild Rose Party to the UCP party. That's still conservative. But you're going to move from UCP to NDP, that's absolutely offside. And I think she's got to call their bluff. I mean, tough decisions is what leadership is about. You know the whole story. The population doesn't. And you need to make decisions that the population trusts you to make. And that's what you need to do, is you need to step up and do it. And so 3 times I had government officials and people representing the government approach me, asking me what would I like to walk away from these investigations. And I'm like, that is the weirdest worded way to word that. What would I like? I don't want anything. The city, though, if you know Chestermere, we've got one rec center, 50 years old. If we didn't have our lake, it would be a empty little town. And when you compare us to a city like Okotoks is a beautiful city and has tons of recreation and tons of commercial. How come Chestermere isn't the same as that? How come our dollars have been diverted away from the city, from doing these things and making these things happen? And the government needs to answer for that, municipal affairs, because they're well aware of this, obviously, and yet they've done nothing. And in fact, they're agreeing to cover things up. And that's like, we approached municipal affairs when we were starting as well as after, is we said, how come when we try to look at other cities, how come there's not standardized accounting between municipalities? Because then we could easily compare and contrast different cities, and it wouldn't matter the size, but you'd try and pick similar sizes, because it would allow you to normalize the numbers. And for a counselor coming in that does not have the business background that we do, how are they going to understand comparables between cities when there really isn't any? And municipal affairs said, not going to happen, not a chance. And I'm like, that is the weirdest answer. So the crazy thing about government, everything is weird. When you look at from a private sector, you're like, you do things on purpose and you've got to do it properly because you've got to hit your targets. And you've got to obviously try and reduce waste, try and make money, try and reduce expenses. That's the focus, try and keep your employees happy so that they're performing well, pay them bonuses, make them move forward, in a positive environment. And those that are not willing to work, well, they need to be removed from your employees. Those that are working hard, yes, you need to keep those staff. That's what you're interested in. And the government does not do it that way. And I think that they very much should, obviously, but they just don't. And I think that attitude is what really is causing so many problems throughout, Canada. Is that attitude of wasting taxpayers' money. And I think it's because of the massive access to these pools of wealth. And, these nefarious people don't have enough eyes on these things. So they end up taking, scams. And it's like that, I think it's called that ArriveCan thing, where that fellow was involved in spending the money on the technology. That would never happen in the public world, where you have, like the government instituted after Enron and these other scandals that happened, SOX controls, SOX. So these SOX controls were forced on these companies to make more transparency, more accountability. And it's a great idea. It's definitely worked very, very well. But what's incredible is the government doesn't put those same controls and requirements on themselves. So you're like, huh, something that works and something that shows transparency, and you don't want to follow it yourself. Wow.
Uh, Mayor Colvin, I know your time is limited, so I promise I'll wrap this up. But I have one question, and it's pertaining to your personal security. So here I'm originally from West Vancouver. We have a mayor, Mark Sager. He ran on a similar platform to yours. He didn't announce it, but he wanted to weed out corruption. As soon as he gets in, the local media starts just pummeling him, running smear campaigns, saying he's bullying the chief CAO.
Yeah.
And that didn't work. So now they're trying to pursue him criminally. I don't know if you know this. They're trying to put him in jail because he can't produce the receipts for a couch that he bought off of Craigslist. I'm not kidding you. It's like 1,000 or less than 3,000, and they're claiming it's campaign finance fraud. So they're trying to muzzle him like that. Why did that happen to you, and why not? Like, why haven't they gone after you criminally?
Well, I mean, we did keep all of our receipts, of course, like during the campaign. That was my first experience with being a politician and running. So they told us to keep the receipts, so we kept the receipts. So I didn't think that was too much of a big deal. But I don't know. Like a lot of the times, because we're stewards of trying to gain more knowledge, and when we're told to do something and read something and follow something, we do. We were told very clearly to get familiar with the MGA and to follow, the requirements that council has to know about projects. Council has to approve the projects. So we did that very early on. And we produced a list of 40, 50 projects that we were working on and was going to be part of our initiatives. And we approved that in council all at once. And so Rick McIver, Minister of Municipal Affairs, didn't like that. He didn't like the fact that we came forward and were just transparent about everything that we were doing. And he was trying to criticize us that you can't be doing these things. You can't be working with the CAO and you can't be doing this. It's like, well, we're not working with the staff on these things. We are working with the CAO and we're working on these projects as per what we've indicated. But this was all disclosed. And so they're frustrated with the fact that we've followed the rules of what they've said. Like people often say, they gave us a list of directives and you didn't follow them. And it's like, yeah, right. It's pretty easy. Here's the list and we followed it. So we did every single thing that list said to do. But part of the problem is Rick McIver likes to spin things. And he likes to say things that are lies. He likes to say things that are partial truth. And that's, it's pretty bad. Like he indicated, for example, he didn't do this publicly, but I had a few mayors that called me and told me that he told them personally that the mayor took millions of dollars. And they said, Jeff, I've known you for 2 years. And as soon as he said that, we knew he was lying. Because how can you take millions of dollars from a city? Do we have suitcases in the basement full of money? If you write yourself a check, which it's like, yeah, we don't write checks anymore. It's all electronic funds transfers, right? So that's how dated that conversation is. And secondly, it's not just one person's signature on a check anyways, if you did. And obviously you could track that pretty easily. Did it go to your bank account or not? So we didn't do any of those kinds of things. And Rick McIver told people, as well as came out in the public, that $600,000 that was taken by that CAO in the inspection report. So this is an inspector, okay, that's taking the time to investigate, do his due diligence, comes out in the inspection report and says the mayor signed the checks to pay out the $600,000. And you're like, that is absolute fraudulent slander. Like, that's the worst thing that person could say. I gave them the copies of the city's bank statements. I gave them the copies of our general ledger statements, which proved and showed, because we looked into this ourselves, it proved and showed that these funds were transferred by electronic funds transferred, and it was a manual payroll entry done by the CAO. So there is no canceled check that has the mayor's signature on it, which again would take multiple signatures. But again, we don't do checks. And yet they put that in writing and said something like that. And so it's just incredible to me, being naive, that the government is allowed to lie like that and get away with it. Like, he should go to jail.
I'm sorry. I have to enter into the realm of speculation, but what do you think is what happened with that 600,000? Do you think it made it back into like a campaign contribution?
No, we have, well, I mean, we have evidence, we have the exact evidence from the bank statements that it was transferred directly to those two people. So he had it transferred to our ex-CFO and our ex-director of HR, their bank accounts. So we have that evidence that proves that, which we showed Minister McIver, and the guy can't stand up for what's right if his life depended on it. And so it's very easy for us to prove these things. So this is what we were critical of municipal affairs from the very get-go. They would never show us any evidence. It was always hearsay. It was always some kind of correct or false statement of some kind. Our response was always based on, well, here's the actual evidence. So what are you talking about? Like, they, for example, said that the mayor, these three rogue councillors said the mayor sold some property from the city's property without council permission. And it's like, well, there's only been one property that we sold, and it's technically conditionally sold. That property had discussions in council and had a council resolution by one of these guys, these rogue councillors, actually put the motion forward to sell that property. And everybody agreed. It was unanimous. And it's like, how could municipal affairs not do the due diligence? I mean, our motions are very public, right? They're on our website. You can go look it up. We have video. There's no question about what you're looking at. And yet that's the information they led with. And there's a bunch of lies like that are so easy. Like, it's like high school. It's so easy to prove wrong. It's like, here's the actual documentation, and yet municipal affairs and the investigator, still quote that this stuff happened. And it's like, because what they rely on is the people not knowing, not taking the time to investigate. Because how would you, a lot of people wouldn't know how to investigate that. It's like, well, look it up on the motions of council and you can take a look. Well, I didn't even know I needed to do that. So part of the problem is that they're okay with lying to the public. And I always thought that was illegal. So I'm surprised as heck that they would actually put it in writing and also say it verbally and out to the newspapers and all these kinds of things. So, we're gonna start a defamation lawsuit and whatnot to go after these guys, because we have so many instances where these guys lied through their teeth. And I don't understand why these guys think they can get away with that kind of stuff. Like, it's like in the business world, you can't do this. And, government, yes, it's new to me. But, it's shocking what they're doing. So one step at a time.
So I have about 1,000 follow-up questions, but our time is running out. So let's end it on this. You mentioned the defamation case. So please tell us what are your next steps? I'm assuming you're not going to throw in the towel. How can the viewers help you? And what advice do you have for anybody that wants to clean up their local council?
So I think the first thing for cleaning up is a lot of residents, taxpayers, don't know how to start. And one of the first things because again, when we push for was standardized accounting, right? And they won't do that. So how do you standardize any of the information you're getting? And that's the problem, is that how do you make it relevant for each person in their respective municipality? One way, and it's a kind of a macro approach, but it normalizes the fund. It normalizes the amount, which means it brings it down to a comparable level across all boards, is to take your gross budget, okay, your operation budget that the city is spending, divide that by your total population. And that'll give you a number of what you're spending, what they're spending per person. So you'll get an idea of what is. So for Chestermere, for example, we got ours down to about 1,600, and we could probably go down to 1,200, no problem. When you take a look at Calgary's $2,300 per person. When you look at the city of Edmonton, they were in the neighborhood of around $1,800 per person. Now, when you look at a city like Cochrane, okay, Cochrane is $2,600 per person. That's way out there. That makes no sense. So they're at their city, which is 5,000 people more than us, so similar in size. Their budget is $83 million. Ours is 50. So what are they spending $30 million more on? Now, this is just the operation side. This isn't your capital budget. So you're not buying a whole bunch of new equipment or something. This is your operation side. So they're spending $30 million a year on 5,000 people. That makes no sense. Right? So something's off there. And that gives them the opportunity. Now, if you speak of Cochrane, they have a petition for recall. Sorry, that's not true. They have a petition for an investigation by Municipal Affairs, and they have over 7,000 people that have signed that petition. And Municipal Affairs, Rick McIver, still will not do a thing. We had, in our city, we never had a petition for recall, never one. What we had is we had 37 letters sent to Municipal Affairs. 37. And of those 37, approximately 15 of them are from our own rogue councillors. So you're like, huh, what does it take to be on that list? And then in questioning of Municipal Affairs, not Rick McIver, he never puts himself on the stand. They released that they never verified the identity of those 37 letters. So whether they're real, whether they're a real person, whether they're a fake person, whether they're from Chestermere, nothing. Not one thing was verified. You're like, huh, wow. You think you guys could have come up with more than 37. But so anyways, for people to identify their first steps, that's their first step, is to take a look at the comparison of what you're spending divided by your population. And that'll give you a number that, quite frankly, I think now you get something for cities to target. You know, it's like, how do we get our city to compete with Calgary, you know? And when you take a look at, like, even Toronto, you take a look at Toronto and compare it to Calgary, Calgary is wildly more expensive. Toronto is closer to, they're 17 billion divided by 6 million people, whereas Calgary's almost 5 billion divided by 1.8 million people. So it really shows you the Calgary has their challenges too. I mean, Toronto, you'd think, would be more expensive, not less, because their infrastructure is older. But that just gives you an idea that, you know, governments don't want us to know these stats so that we can, as citizens, can quote them very quickly and say, why aren't you following in line? You know, and it's pretty critical to take a look at even the province. The province's budget is $70 billion. We have approximately 100 billion of royalties a year. This is per year. In that 70 billion, you're like, well, so what does the province do? Now they do things, obviously, but every person lives in a municipality. Every municipality is taking care of that square foot of land. So the provinces are not taking care of that square foot of land. So it gets you to wonder, you know, how efficiently are our dollars, tax dollars, being spent, right? And unless you have people that are really interested in looking, trying to hold our politicians to account, and, you know, good luck. I mean, everybody's been trying to do that for, you know, years and years and years, but you've got to try and reduce the corruption. And I think the number one way to reduce corruption is to bring more eyes onto it. And one of the things that I want to try and put forward at the next UCP UCP AGM, is that I want to try and put forward a motion to standardize the counting between municipalities. And I want to try and put forward a motion for forced changes to the RFP process, which is the request for proposal process that municipalities have to go through, and force them to be transparent. Force it so that all the developers are involved. Force it so the public can take a look at it too. It's not a secret to anybody. And that act in itself, by having the experts involved, in my opinion, reduces or eliminates the corruption, because those people know what the right prices are. They know what the right prices for that bridge is. They know it's not $10 million. They know it's $4 million. You're not surprising anybody here. And that, you know, forcing the accountability would help everybody, along with, you know, the contract language, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, these are things that citizens can get involved with, and they can push their councils to say, you know, we want you to have full transparency with your RFP processes for infrastructure, and make sure that the developers are involved in that process from the get-go, from the design stages and everything. Not a I can't think of the word for it, but, you know, just a a nonsense position, a real position where they're involved in the actual design. And that's how we benefited so substantially from our developers. Now, we weren't friendly to the developers in the sense that people were saying, well, you're a developer, you're going to be biased. And I said, no, I'm on your team. I said, it's a good thing to have because I know what they can and can't do. And when we first got in, our offsite levies, we reviewed the analysis on them. And with our concern of the city paying money on the developer's behalf, we increased our offsite levies by 35%. So that was huge. Some of our developers had to pay $20 million more. So we weren't their friend. But I said, is there anything wrong with our calculations? And they said no. And I said, is there ways that we could save money and these numbers could come down? Yes. But until we prove that and until we have the actual results, they have to cover the costs because we're not paying for your costs. It's not happening. And if we can come up with a method in which you can get your money back if it comes in less, I'm all for that. Nobody's trying to rip anybody off. So anyways, in response to your question, that taxpayers need to make sure that they're focused on electing business people into their councils. You've got to make sure that the rubber hits the road and the money is not wasted, because you cannot get the money to the social spending programs if you don't have any money left. And so social programs are vastly important. There's no question. But you have to have the money available to do it. And if you can make the money and save the money and not waste the money, that's exactly what we did. And we had a whole bunch more money to be able to go towards social programs and recreation and all the things society needs, rather than, these scoundrels being able to take the money. And so I think there's enough reason for everybody to want to get behind something like that. And I think every municipality can benefit from these things. And councillors, they've got to ask the right questions. But I do feel that the single CAO model is designed to fail. It's a gatekeeper. It's one person, and they can control the narrative. That is not democracy. Democracy is all about transparency, and it does cost more because you've got more people looking. But that whole point is that's the point, is to stop corruption. More people, more eyes on it, more light shining on it. And then hopefully we're getting less corruption, because corruption, in my opinion, is one of the biggest reasons for inflation. All of our expenses are more because of the corruption. If we can get corruption rooted out or down, that'll massively bring the cost of living down significantly. And that's obviously beneficial to all of the citizens. And I went to municipal affairs just in closing, and I said to them, we're reviewing our numbers and how we're operating the city. I actually believe we could eliminate residential taxes. Whether that's a good thing, that could be debated. Maybe it should be 10% or something. But I said, financially, we've identified that we can eliminate it. And they didn't give a crap at all. And I'm like, why aren't you focused on municipalities reducing their debt, municipalities not wasting taxpayers' money, and taxes coming down? Why is that not part of your focus? And they of course won't answer that, but it is weird that they want to keep us beholden to more debt, more focus around the challenging things in life, I guess, rather than fiscal responsibility and bringing our costs in order so we can have a more enjoyable life. And I keep thinking of a city as like a large co-op. And we're all just here to try and pool some of our resources so we can get things done. We want to pool some money for some protection for police. We want to pool some money so that our roads get plowed. We want our garbage to be picked up. And that's really what we're doing. So anyways, I just think that we've got to do a better job. And that's, you've got to start somewhere, but the citizens can definitely start in those places.
Well, Mayor Colvin, I'm going to hold you over after the end of the show, but I wanted to thank you for your time. We went over time, and I don't know, I think all of Canada appreciates what you've done, and I hope you realize how significant your contribution is, sir.
Thank you very much for the time. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Have a nice day.